So Pokemon Sun and Moon got some new info dropped, and that's pretty exciting. I've been waiting for a long time to hear more information about Pokemon Sun and Moon because, I really love Pokemon. But I don't think I love Pokemon as much as I used to. I've played every single Pokemon game to date, and one thing that always bugged me about the new Pokemon games were their stories. Now, for reasons I'll get into a little bit later, I think Pokemon Black and White and maybe White 2 and Black 2 had the best stories for any Pokemon handheld. Recently, the stories have been pretty generic, and that's a problem in my book for an RPG like Pokemon. I understand that a lot of people do like this generic storyline. Some people enjoy the nostalgia factor, the sense of familiarity, and the fact that the story is not too complicated and doesn't take that much to get into. And I guess I can see where those people are coming from, but personally I would love to see a Pokemon story that is more developed and takes leaps. Pokemon White and Black, for an example, was a step in the right direction. It featured a story about Pokemon ethics as a sort of response to the PETA criticism Pokemon games have always been getting. And for that reason, the story was pretty compelling and you could relate to all the characters on screen like N, Genghis Khan, and the player. People had always jokingly and seriously questioned whether or not Pokemon training was ethical, and it seemed like Game Freak had been responding to those claims and showing that it was ethical and it was okay to train your Pokemon. It was a commentary on one of the most popular critiques of Pokemon at the time. Despite Black and White not having the most interesting new Pokemon, it's still my favorite Pokemon game on a handheld. The story kept me engaged, and for an RPG, that's really good. By the same token, Pokemon Colosseum, a GameCube game that came out in the early 2000s, was a unique Pokemon game that featured a story unlike any other. It was a story about shadow Pokemon and forcing other Pokemon to do things against their will. For once, you could empathize with the Pokemon you were stealing from other people. There was a reason to collect Pokemon. It was to save them from the cruelty that they were experiencing. And the characters in that game were pretty well developed. You played as Wes, a criminal who turned into a hero, and accompanying you was this girl that had a special power. And these two people, despite not having a lot of dialogue, felt really dynamic and fleshed out. This was a Pokemon game that you felt engrossed in. Like, what you did actually mattered. When you compare this to Pokemon X and Y, you don't really get the same feeling. In Pokemon X and Y, you're stopping a generic team from doing a thing with a giant laser death beam. I'm not going to spoil anything, but the most compelling thing about that plot was the giant. You only get to experience the character of the villain in Pokemon X and Y at the end, which lessens his overall impact. When you compare that to Pokemon Black and White, which depicts the villain team doing terrible things throughout the entire game and making a case for their point of view, you really see how underdeveloped the plot and characters are in Pokemon X and Y. Before Pokemon Black and White, Pokemon games still had a somewhat generic storyline. Nowadays, when I play a traditional turn-based RPG, I want to feel invested and immersed into the story. Whereas before, when I was a kid and I played RPGs just for the gameplay, now I want to get something out of playing that game. I want my experience to matter. And I hope when I play Pokemon Sun and Moon this coming holiday season 2016, I get something out of that plot too. Maybe Pokemon Sun and Moon will do away with the whole gym structure. Maybe you'll be a criminal in the beginning and do bad things before you're eventually a hero. Maybe the league championship won't even be a thing. I'm fairly certain that a lot of these things won't happen, but just imagine if Pokemon just switched up the whole formula. A new structure might not even work, but the attempt would be appreciated. But as always, if you disagree or agree with me, let me know in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching and take care. Have a wonderful day and goodbye.